A man, cold and unfeeling, ties a frail Mustang to a tree deep within the desolate wilderness. The sickly horse, weak and alone, stands motionless, surrounded by the distant howls of starving wolves. As darkness falls, its tired eyes begin to close, surrendering to fate. The predators creep closer, their eyes gleaming with hunger. But just when all hope seems lost, an extraordinary twist changes everything. Stay with us for a gripping tale of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that defy all odds. The crisp air of dusk settled over the vast Montana wilderness, bathing the forest in hues of gold and slate. The land was eerily quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the occasional echo of wolves howling in the distance. But amid this natural serenity, a grim scene unfolded, a disruption to the harmony of the wild. A Mustang, ribs protruding through its dull chestnut coat, stood tethered to a towering pine tree. Its body trembled with exhaustion, its head hanging low, as if the weight of the rope around its neck was too much to bear. Once a proud and untamed spirit of the wild, the Mustang now stood as a ghost of its former self. Each breath it took was a struggle, each movement slow and strained. The rope binding it was thick and cruel, digging into its neck as if sealing its fate. Its hooves pressed weakly against the frozen earth, legs barely able to support its weary frame. The will to fight had long since faded, leaving behind nothing but a creature on the brink of surrender. Nearby, a rugged man stood motionless, his presence as cold as the biting wind that swept through the trees. John Harper, a hardened rancher in his late 40s, gazed at the horse with a blank expression. His boots crunched against the frost-covered ground as he adjusted the knot, making sure the rope held firm. "No use keeping you," he muttered, his voice void of emotion. "You're nothing but trouble." The Mustang's glassy eyes flickered toward John, searching for something, pity, kindness, a reason to hope. But there was nothing. It was sick, useless to him, and with debts piling up in a failing ranch, John had no patience left. He had found the abandoned horse limping across his land days ago. Nursing it back to health had been a fleeting thought, but reality had hardened his heart. He made his choice. He took one last look at the sinking sun behind the jagged mountain peaks. The wolves were near, he could hear them. They would find the horse soon enough. Without another word, John turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, never once looking back. The Mustang remained still, its ears twitching toward the growing howls. The last warmth of the fading sun disappeared, replaced by the creeping chill of night. Soon the wolves would come. The air was thick with their scent, their hunger palpable. The horse exhaled, nostrils flaring, but there was no panic, only resignation. Then the first predator appeared. Golden eyes flickered in the darkness, a sleek, shadowy form moving soundlessly through the underbrush. A second set of eyes joined, then a third. Slowly, a pack emerged, their lean bodies forming a loose circle around the helpless animal. Their low growls rumbled through the still night air, a promise of what was to come. The Mustang flinched, instincts screaming even as its body refused to fight. One wolf slinked forward, muscles coiled, teeth glinting in the moonlight. It crouched, ready to lunge, when suddenly, a sharp, unexpected sound cut through the forest. A high-pitched whistle, piercing and unnatural, shattered the tension. The wolves froze, ears twitching toward the source. Even the Mustang lifted its head, ears pricked forward for the first time in hours. The whistle came again, followed by movement among the trees. A figure emerged, stepping into the moonlight. A frail but determined old man carried a flickering lantern, his sharp eyes sweeping over the scene. The wolves snarled but hesitated, instincts warning them to be wary. The man took another step, his voice rough but commanding. "Get!" he barked, swinging the lantern in a wide arc. The wolves growled but inched backward, their hunger clashing with caution. A few more moments of tense hesitation, then one by one they retreated, vanishing into the night. The forest fell silent. The Mustang's body sagged with exhaustion as the old man approached. His wiry frame and deeply lined face spoke of a life spent in solitude, of battles fought and won. His gaze softened as he took in the horse's condition. "Well now," he murmured, pulling a knife from his belt. "Ain't you in a sorry state?" The Mustang stiffened but didn't resist as the man carefully cut the rope, freeing it from its prison. The last strand snapped, and with a final shuddering breath, the horse collapsed onto the ground, too weak to stand. Kneeling beside it, the man placed a weathered hand on its trembling neck. "Easy now," he whispered. "We'll get you out of here." With surprising strength, the old man Eli crafted a sled from fallen branches, hauling the Mustang onto it with careful precision. The horse barely stirred as he hitched it to his faithful mule. "Come on now," he said, clicking his tongue. The slow journey through the forest began, the steady rhythm of the mule's hooves lulling the Mustang into an uneasy sleep. For the first time in days the scent of death faded. Hope, as fragile as the morning mist, lingered in the cold air. The dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, spilling golden light through the thick canopy. In a secluded clearing a small wooden cabin stood, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. The outside world was miles away. Inside, the Mustang lay sprawled on a bed of soft hay, the warmth of the cabin a stark contrast to the icy wilderness from which it had come. Eli moved with quiet efficiency, his calloused hands tending to the horse with practiced care. His life had been spent in the solitude of the mountains, carving out an existence in the untamed wild. Now he had a new mission. "You've been left for dead," he murmured, setting a bowl of warm mash beside the sleeping horse. "But not on my watch." The Mustang's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, the firelight casting flickering shadows across its frail body. It had survived the night. Now, a new battle lay ahead, the battle to heal, to reclaim what had been taken, and perhaps to find something worth living for. As Eli settled into his chair, watching over his unexpected guest, he let out a weary sigh. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate had tied their paths together. And in the depths of the wilderness, the most unexpected bonds are often the ones that change everything. The bitter wind howled through the wilderness, its icy touch sending shivers through the towering pines. A lone figure stood in the dying light, his presence a dark stain against the hues of twilight. Nearby, tethered tightly to an old tree, stood a Mustang, its once powerful form now weak and trembling. The horse's ribs jutted through its dull coat, its breaths ragged as it fought against the bitter cold and growing exhaustion. Yet the man beside it showed no mercy. John Harper, a hardened rancher with years of struggle etched into his weathered face, tightened his grip on the rope. His eyes, cold and devoid of sympathy, studied the Mustang's feeble stance. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered under his breath. His boots crunched against the frost-covered ground as he turned away, hands deep in his coat pockets. The wind carried the distant howls of wolves, growing closer with every passing moment. He hesitated, but only for a second. Without another glance, he walked away, leaving the Mustang to the mercy of the wild. The darkness deepened, and the forest came alive with unseen predators. Golden eyes glowed between the trees, low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The first wolf emerged, its sleek form blending seamlessly with the shadows. Then another. And another. They moved with a deadly grace, circling the helpless creature that had been left for dead. The Mustang flinched, its nostrils flaring as fear took hold. A weak, mournful whinny escaped its throat, a final, desperate plea. But the wilderness had no ears for mercy. The wolves crept closer, their hunger outweighing their caution. One lowered itself into a crouch, ready to strike. Then suddenly a sound shattered the night, a sharp, piercing whistle that sliced through the eerie stillness. The wolves hesitated, their ears swiveling toward the unexpected disturbance. The Mustang's ears flicked forward, its tired eyes lifting for the first time in hours. Another whistle followed, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on frost. A lantern flickered in the shadows, its golden glow revealing the silhouette of a wiry figure. The wolves growled, reluctant to surrender their prey, but the man strode forward with purpose, swinging the lantern in a wide arc. "Go on, get," he barked, his voice edged with authority. The pack snarled but backed away, their instincts warning them not to challenge the stranger. One by one they disappeared into the trees, their eyes lingering in the darkness before vanishing completely. The man stepped closer, the light from his lantern revealing deep lines on his face and sharp, knowing eyes. Eli, a reclusive hermit who had long abandoned the world beyond the trees, crouched beside the Mustang. "Well now," he murmured, pulling a knife from his belt. "Ain't right leaving you like this." His hands were firm yet careful as he cut through the rope that had bound the horse to its fate. The moment the last strand fell away, the Mustang collapsed, its body too weak to support itself any longer. Eli frowned, placing a steadying hand on its trembling neck. "Easy now. We'll get you sorted." With the patience of someone who had spent his life in solitude, Eli fashioned a sled from fallen branches, hauling the Mustang onto it with surprising strength. He hitched the makeshift sled to his mule, speaking in soothing tones as he began the slow trek back to his cabin. The Mustang, though exhausted beyond reason, felt something it hadn't in days: hope. Dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, spilling soft light over the clearing where Eli's cabin stood. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a silent promise of warmth and safety. Inside, the Mustang lay curled on a bed of hay, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Eli moved about the cabin, stirring a pot of herbs over the fire, his sharp gaze flicking toward the horse every so often. "You've got some fight left in you," he muttered. "More than most." As he spooned the warm mixture into a bowl, memories of his past flickered through his mind, days when he'd lived among men, where cruelty was commonplace and kindness was a rare thing. He had seen too much, lost too much, and so he had chosen solitude. Yet here he was, tending to a creature that the world had deemed worthless. With a quiet sigh, he knelt beside the Mustang. "This'll help," he said, coaxing the warm liquid into the horse's mouth. The animal tensed but swallowed, its dark eyes meeting Eli's for the first time. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Days turned to weeks, and the Mustang, whom Eli had named Ember, began to regain its strength. The dullness in its eyes faded, replaced by a spark of defiance. Its coat, once ragged and lifeless, now held a faint sheen. Eli watched with satisfaction as Ember took its first unsteady steps outside the cabin, wobbling but determined. "That's it, boy," he murmured, his voice laced with quiet pride. "That's the spirit." But the wilderness had not forgotten. The wolves, though unseen, lurked at the edges of the clearing, their presence a constant reminder that danger was never far. Eli kept his rifle close, his ears trained for the telltale rustle of movement. One evening as he sat by the fire, his old hound Rusty lifted his head and growled, a low warning sound. Eli rose, rifle in hand, stepping outside just in time to see two glowing eyes watching from the treeline. He tightened his grip, muttering under his breath, "Not tonight." Ember, standing near the cabin's window, twitched his ears at the sound. The Mustang had healed, but something deeper had changed. The spirit that had once been beaten down had returned fiercer than before. Whatever the wilderness had in store for them, they would face it together. As the days passed, Ember grew stronger, his body lean but powerful. Eli led him on cautious walks through the forest, ensuring his legs could bear his weight. Each step felt like a victory. "Ain't so broken after all," Eli mused, watching as Ember lifted his head high, nostrils flaring as he took in the scents of the woods. But the quiet could not last. The wolves had grown bolder, their silence more unsettling than their howls. Eli could feel it in the air, the kind of stillness that came before a storm. His instincts screamed at him to be ready. As he fastened Ember's lead rope one morning, preparing for another walk through the woods, he cast a glance toward the trees. He had lived too long in the wild not to recognize when something was coming. Something was watching. And this time it wasn't just the wolves. Eli spoke more to himself than to Ember, reassuring him that he was stronger now and ready for whatever came next. As they walked deeper into the forest, Ember's steps grew more relaxed, his confidence building. Eli led him to a shallow stream where the horse drank, his muscles rippling beneath his coat. Eli knelt by the water, splashing his face with the cold, invigorating water, feeling the pulse of life in the wilderness. For a moment, everything seemed still, the only sounds the soft babble of the stream and birds overhead. Eli smiled at Ember, calling him a fighter, but the peace didn't last. A faint rustle of leaves broke the silence, so subtle that most wouldn't notice, but Eli froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. Ember's ears perked up, and the forest, once calm, now felt heavy with tension. Eli scanned the trees as the rustling grew louder, followed by a low growl and the emergence of glowing eyes, wolves. The pack circled, moving silently through the underbrush, and Ember tensed, backing closer to Eli. Eli raised his rifle, aiming at the largest wolf, and muttered, "Not today." The alpha growled, bared its teeth, and stepped closer. Eli fired a warning shot, but the wolves didn't scatter. They crouched lower, ready to attack. Realizing the odds, Eli glanced at Ember, who was not just scared but ready to fight. Dropping the rope, Eli shouted, "Go, Ember!" The Mustang hesitated for only a moment before rearing up and charging at the wolves, his hooves thundering. The wolves scattered, yelping as Ember lashed out. The alpha lunged, but Ember dodged with surprising agility. Eli watched in awe as the horse, once weak, fought back with the strength of a true survivor. Within moments, the pack retreated, and Ember stood victorious, his sides heaving with triumph. Eli approached cautiously, pride swelling in his chest, and praised the Mustang for facing down the wolves. Ember snorted, as if to say he'd known all along he could do it. As they walked back to the cabin, the forest seemed lighter, and Eli felt stronger alongside Ember. The Mustang had proven himself not just a survivor but a fighter. They were stronger together than apart. When Eli entered the cabin, the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows. Ember grazed peacefully, the wolves gone. For the first time in weeks, Eli relaxed, but a lingering unease remained. His routine hadn't changed much, but the presence of Ember added purpose to his solitary life. As he neared the clearing, tracks caught his eye, large, fresh hoofprints. Someone had been here. A chill ran down his spine. By midday, Ember grew restless, sensing something was wrong. Eli noticed the change and tightened his grip on the rifle. The sound of hooves approached, and 3 men on horseback emerged from the trees. Their faces were obscured by hats and scarves, and they scanned the clearing until their eyes locked on Ember. The group's leader, his voice gruff, dismounted with a thud, his boots hitting the ground. "Told you he'd be here," he muttered. Eli stepped forward, positioning himself between Ember and the men. "This is private land," he said firmly. "You've got no business here." The man chuckled, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "That horse doesn't belong to you, old man. He's ours. Took off during a storm a while back and we've been looking for him ever since." Eli's jaw tightened. "That horse was left for dead, tied to a tree like garbage. Doesn't sound like the kind of care a real owner would give." The man's expression darkened. "Doesn't matter how you found him, he's ours and we're taking him back." Eli raised his rifle, aiming it directly at the man's chest. "You're not taking him anywhere." For a moment, the clearing was dead silent, the tension so thick it could be felt. The other 2 men shifted uneasily in their saddles, their hands hovering near their own weapons. Ember, sensing the hostility, snorted and moved closer to Eli, his muscles coiled, ready for action. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the man said, his tone dripping with mockery, "but you're outnumbered. You really think you can stop us?" Eli's grip tightened on the rifle. "I don't care how many of you there are, that horse isn't going anywhere." The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to back down. Eli's heart raced, but his hands remained steady. He had faced danger before, but this felt different. These men weren't just a threat to Ember, they were a threat to everything Eli had come to care about. The man raised his hand, signaling to the others. "We'll be back," he said ominously, "and next time we won't be asking." With that, they turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving Eli and Ember alone in the clearing. Eli lowered the rifle, his mind racing. Whoever those men were, they weren't going to give up easily, and Eli had no intention of letting them take Ember back. That evening, Eli worked hard to fortify the cabin, reinforcing the doors and windows, setting traps around the perimeter, and keeping the rifle within reach. Ember stood nearby, his eyes scanning the shadows as if keeping watch. The Mustang had become more than just a companion. He was a partner in survival, a living testament to resilience. As the moon rose high above the forest, Eli sat by the fire, his thoughts heavy. The wolves had been a test of strength, but this was different. It was a battle of wills, a fight for what was right. Eli glanced at Ember, who stood tall and proud despite his scars. "We'll face them together," Eli said quietly, "no matter what." The next morning, the forest was unusually quiet, the birds hesitant to break the silence. Eli stepped out of the cabin, his rifle resting on his shoulder. Ember grazed near the tree line, his ears twitching at every faint sound. The Mustang's body was relaxed, but his watchful gaze told Eli everything he needed to know. The men would be back and they wouldn't come alone. Eli had spent most of the night preparing for their return, fortifying the cabin, setting traps, and mapping out every potential blind spot. Years of living in the wilderness had taught him how to defend what was his, and he wasn't about to let a group of hired thugs take Ember without a fight. The morning passed slowly, each moment stretched thin with tension. Eli moved through his routine with practiced efficiency, but his mind never left the previous day's encounter. He replayed the men's words, their threatening tone, the way their eyes lingered on Ember. They weren't going to stop. They saw the Mustang as property, a tool to be used, and they'd do whatever it took to get him back. By midday, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. Eli froze, his pulse quickening as he grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. 4 men emerged from the tree line, each one armed and mounted on powerful horses. The leader, the same tall man from before, wore a cruel smirk as he dismounted. "I told you we'd be back," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. Eli raised his rifle, his stance unwavering. "I don't take kindly to trespassers." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You're out of your league, old man. There's 4 of us and 1 of you. Be smart, hand over the horse and we'll leave you in one piece." Ember snorted, pawing the ground as if sensing the danger. Eli glanced at the Mustang, his resolve hardening. "This horse isn't yours. You abandoned him, left him to die. That makes him mine now. The leader's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. You've got guts, I'll give you that, but guts won't save you. The standoff escalated quickly as one of the men drew his pistol, but before he could aim, Eli fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the clearing, startling the horses and sending a flock of birds flying from the trees. Next one won't miss, Eli said, his voice low and steady. The leader raised a hand, signaling his men to hold back. You think you can take all of us? He mocked. You're just one man. Eli smirked. One man who knows these woods better than you ever will. As if on cue, one of the traps Eli had set earlier snapped shut, catching one of the men's horses by the leg. The animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. The man scrambled to his feet, cursing as he tried to free the horse. Eli took the opportunity to step back toward the cabin, keeping the rifle trained on the remaining men. Leave now and no one else gets hurt, Eli warned. But if you step 1 foot closer, I won't hesitate. The leader's face twisted with rage, but he seemed to understand that Eli wasn't bluffing. He turned to his men, barking orders. Get him and get that damn horse. The next few moments were a blur of chaos as one of the men charged toward Ember, a lasso in hand. Ember reared up, his powerful hooves striking the air, sending a wave of panic through the attackers. Eli fired another shot, grazing the leader's shoulder. The man fell back, clutching his arm as his horse bolted into the trees. Ember, fueled by instinct and fear, lunged forward, breaking free from the rope tethering him to the clearing. He charged at one of the remaining men, his hooves striking the ground with a thunderous force. The man panicked, his horse stumbling as he tried to retreat, but Ember's wild, untamed energy was too much for them to handle. Eli seized the distraction, aiming at the leader, who was now backing toward the tree line, his eyes darting between Eli and Ember. This isn't over, the man growled before turning his horse and disappearing into the forest. The others followed in a hasty, disorganized retreat. As the dust settled, Eli lowered his rifle, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Ember stood in the center of the clearing, his sides heaving, eyes blazing with triumph. The Mustang's defiance had been the key to driving the attackers away, and Eli couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He approached the horse slowly, his voice soft. You did good, boy. Real good. Ember snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along how it would end. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. We're not done yet, he said. They'll be back, but we'll be ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clearing in golden light, Eli set to work reinforcing his defenses. The fight wasn't over, but he and Ember had proven they were more than capable of holding their ground. Together they were a force to be reckoned with, man and Mustang, bound by resilience, determination, and an unshakable will to survive. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. Eli paced near the cabin, rifle in hand, his mind racing with thoughts of the men who had fled. He knew their retreat was only temporary. Men like that didn't take defeat lightly, they'd return stronger, angrier, and more determined than before. Ember stood nearby, his ears swiveling toward every faint noise. The Mustang's powerful frame was taut with tension, his instincts sharper than ever. He had faced wolves, illness, and cruelty, and now he stood as a defiant protector of the life he had reclaimed. Eli looked at the horse and felt a surge of pride. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Eli spent the remaining daylight preparing for what he knew would be the final confrontation. He reset the traps around the perimeter, sharpened the blades of his knives, and ensured every bullet in his rifle was accounted for. His old hound, Rusty, trotted at his heels, his graying muzzle a reminder of the years they had spent in solitude. Tonight the cabin wouldn't just be a shelter, it would be a fortress. As darkness fully descended, the forest came alive with sound, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the faint crunch of footsteps too faint for most to notice but not for Eli. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the tree line. They were here. The first sign of their approach was the glint of lantern light filtering through the trees. 4 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses moving in a tight formation. This time they weren't playing games. The leader, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face, dismounted with purpose. He carried a shotgun, its polished barrel gleaming in the moonlight. We're not leaving without the horse, the man called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. You've got one last chance to hand him over. Eli stepped out from the cabin, his rifle raised. I don't think you understand, he replied, his voice calm but firm. This horse isn't going anywhere, not with you. The man smirked, tightening his grip on the shotgun. You're a stubborn old fool, but stubbornness won't save you. The air grew heavy with tension as the men spread out, weapons drawn. Eli's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. He had faced danger before, wild animals, brutal storms, the unforgiving wilderness, but this felt different. This was a test of his resolve, a fight for what he believed in. Rusty, Eli said quietly, glancing at the hound. The dog's ears perked up, and he darted into the shadows, disappearing from view. Eli knew Rusty would take up a position near the traps, ready to create a distraction if needed. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. One of the men fired into the air, a warning meant to intimidate, but Eli didn't flinch. He took aim and fired back. The crack of his rifle echoed through the clearing, and the bullet struck the ground near one of the men's horses, causing the animal to rear and throw its rider. Chaos erupted. Ember, sensing the danger, reared up, his powerful legs striking the air. One of the men tried to lasso the Mustang, but Ember lunged forward, breaking free of the rope. The horse charged toward the attackers, his hooves thundering against the ground. Eli fired another shot, grazing the leader's shoulder. The man cursed, stumbling back as blood stained his shirt. The remaining riders hesitated, their confidence shaken by Ember's ferocity and Eli's precision. But the leader wasn't ready to give up. "Take him down," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. Eli retreated toward the cabin, using the structure as cover. He fired another shot, this one striking the leg of a man attempting to flank him. The attacker cried out, falling to the ground as his horse bolted into the forest. Rusty emerged from the shadows, barking fiercely as he darted toward the men, drawing their attention away from Eli. Ember's wild energy was the turning point. The Mustang charged at the leader, his hooves striking with terrifying force. The man raised his shotgun, but before he could fire, Ember reared up and knocked the weapon from his hands. The leader stumbled, his eyes wide with fear. As the Mustang stood over him, a living embodiment of the untamed wilderness, Eli kept his rifle trained on the remaining attackers. "Call them off," he ordered, his voice steady. The leader hesitated, his eyes darting between Eli and Ember before finally raising his hands in surrender. "Fall back," he growled to his men. "It's not worth it." One by one they retreated into the forest, their figures vanishing into the shadows. Eli lowered his rifle, his chest heaving as the adrenaline slowly faded. Ember stood tall, his sides still heaving from the fight, but his spirit was unbroken. The Mustang snorted, tossing his head as if to say he had known all along how this would end. As the silence settled over the clearing, Eli stepped forward, placing a firm but gentle hand on Ember's neck. "You did it, boy," he murmured. "You showed them what you're made of." The Mustang leaned into Eli's touch, his wild eyes softening, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They had won, not just the fight but something greater. The men wouldn't return. Not after tonight. The wilderness had its own way of enforcing justice, and justice had been served. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Eli stood in the clearing with Ember beside him, both battered but undefeated. They had fought for survival, but more than that, they had fought for freedom. And in doing so, they had forged an unbreakable bond, one that neither time nor distance could erase. The morning light bathed the clearing in a soft glow, highlighting the Mustang's chestnut coat, now marked with the scars of his journey. Eli leaned against the cabin's porch, his rifle resting beside him, watching as Ember grazed quietly. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different, lighter, almost peaceful. The men who had come for Ember were gone, their arrogance shattered by the defiance of a wild horse and the resolve of the man who had stood beside him. Eli knew they wouldn't return. The wilderness had taught them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Nearby, Ember flicked his ears at the rustling leaves, ever watchful, ever untamed. He had been through hell and back, but he had emerged stronger, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the wild. Eli watched him with a quiet admiration, knowing the horse had not only saved himself but had also saved him. This place had once been a refuge of solitude for Eli, a retreat from the world, but Ember had changed that. The Mustang had breathed life into the stillness, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, connection and hope could still flourish. Eli took slow steps toward the edge of the clearing, stopping as Ember lifted his head, meeting his gaze. In the horse's dark eyes, Eli saw something unspoken, a trust that neither force nor fear could break. He reached out, placing a hand on Ember's neck. "You're something special," he said quietly. "They tried to break you, but you didn't let them." Ember snorted, his breath a mist in the cool morning air. Eli chuckled, giving the Mustang a final pat. "It's time," he murmured. "Time for you to go back to where you belong." As much as it pained him, Eli knew this was never meant to be a permanent home for Ember. The wild was his home, and Eli couldn't stand in the way of that. He spent the next few hours preparing, removing the makeshift halter from Ember's neck, his fingers lingering in the horse's mane one last time. The Mustang stood still as if he understood. Eli walked to the clearing's gate, opening it wide. "Go on now," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Run free." For a moment, Ember didn't move. He looked at Eli, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with a powerful leap, he took off, hooves pounding against the earth as he disappeared into the trees. Eli stood there watching long after Ember was gone. The clearing felt emptier now, but it wasn't the same as before. Ember's presence had left a mark, one that wouldn't fade with time. The wilderness had tested them both, and they had survived. Weeks turned into months, and life in the forest settled back into its familiar rhythm. The wolves returned to their distant hills. The men stayed far away. And Eli, once again, embraced the quiet solitude of his cabin. But every so often, as he walked through the woods or sat on the porch, he would catch a glimpse of movement among the trees, a chestnut figure watching from the shadows. Ember was out there, running free just as he was always meant to. And though they no longer stood side by side, Eli knew their bond would never fade. The wilderness had a way of shaping those who dared to call it home, but it also had a way of rewarding those who refused to break. For Eli and Ember, their story was not just one of survival. It was a testament to resilience, trust, and the enduring spirit of the untamed. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting the world in warm golden hues, Eli leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Somewhere out there, Ember was running free, a symbol of everything the wilderness stood for. Strength, freedom, the unwavering will to survive. And for Eli that was enough. Freedom isn't just about surviving. It's about reclaiming what was always meant to be yours. This is the story of Ember, a Mustang who defied all odds, proving that courage and resilience can overcome even the cruelest of trials. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves inspiring tales of strength and connection. Together, we can spread a message of hope, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Because in the end, no life should ever be left behind.